The morning light filtered through the crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber, casting rainbow patterns across the polished floor. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat in their specially designed seats, each one built to accommodate their unique biology. The Zephyrians with their tall bird-like frames perched on elevated platforms. The thick-skinned Corvins sat in reinforced chairs that could support their massive weight. The insect-like Mantari hung from ceiling fixtures, their compound eyes glittering as they watched the proceedings. At the human section, Ambassador Sarah Chen sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap. She looked small compared to most of the other delegates, but she had learned that looking harmless was often more useful than looking powerful. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style, and she wore the same plain blue uniform that all human diplomats had worn for the past 300 years. The current debate was getting heated. The Andromedan Federation was accusing the Rigel Consortium of stealing their quantum mining technology. Both sides were shouting through their translators, their alien voices creating a cacophony that would have been painful to human ears, if not for the sound dampeners. "The theft is obvious," screeched the Andromedan representative, his crystalline body flashing angry red colors. "They developed identical technology within days of our research team's visit to their system." "Coincidence," rumbled the Rigel delegate, a massive creature that looked like a walking boulder. "Great minds think alike across the galaxy." Other representatives began choosing sides. The chamber filled with angry voices in dozens of languages. Some delegates were standing now, their various appendages waving in aggressive gestures. The session moderator, a patient Centauran, was frantically tapping his gavel, but the noise was too loud. Sarah Chen stood up slowly. She didn't raise her voice or make any grand gestures. She simply cleared her throat softly. Somehow the small sound cut through all the noise. One by one, the angry voices fell silent. All eyes turned to the human ambassador. "Friends," she said, her voice gentle and calm, "we seem to have lost sight of what matters here. Both the Andromedans and the Rigel Consortium are valuable members of our galactic community. Both have contributed greatly to our shared knowledge and prosperity." She walked to the center of the chamber, moving with the graceful steps that other species had come to associate with human diplomacy. "Instead of accusations, perhaps we could focus on solutions? The Andromedans have made a breakthrough in quantum mining. The Rigel Consortium has similar technology. Rather than viewing this as theft, could we not see it as an opportunity for collaboration?" The Andromedan's crystalline body shifted from angry red to a more neutral blue. "What do you propose, Ambassador Chen?" Sarah smiled, the same patient smile she had perfected over decades of diplomatic work. "A joint research project. Pool your knowledge, share the benefits. Both civilizations could advance faster together than either could alone. And perhaps other council members could contribute as well. I believe the Vaktar clans have some interesting insights into quantum field manipulation." The mention of the Vaktar clans getting involved made several delegates shift nervously. The warrior species was known for their aggressive nature, but they were also brilliant engineers. If they joined a research project, it would definitely succeed, though it might also become heavily militarized. But that was exactly why Sarah had suggested it. Over the past 3 centuries, humans had become experts at managing the complex politics of galactic civilization. They knew exactly which species to mention to create the right pressure, which fears to touch on, and which desires to appeal to. As the debate continued with much less anger now, Sarah returned to her seat. She appeared to be taking notes on her simple datapad, but she was actually doing something far more complex. Every gesture, every word, every subtle shift in body language from the other delegates was being recorded and analyzed. The information would be transmitted back to Earth within hours, where it would be added to humanity's ever-growing database of galactic intelligence. This was how it had always worked. For 300 years, since first contact with the Zephyrian traders who had found Earth's early space colonies, humans had played the role of peaceful mediators. They had no interest in conquest or domination, they claimed. They were simply curious about other cultures and eager to help maintain galactic peace. What the other species didn't know was that every human in space was part of the largest intelligence network in galactic history. The cultural exchange students who visited other worlds were actually trained observers. The medical research teams that traveled from system to system were mapping defensive capabilities. The trade negotiators who established commercial relationships were gathering detailed information about industrial capacity and resource distribution. Dr. James Park, officially Earth's leading expert on Corvin biology, sat in the observation gallery above the main chamber. He had spent 20 years living among the Corvins, learning their language, studying their customs, and publishing respected papers on their unique physiology. The Corvins considered him an honorary member of their species. What they didn't know was that Dr. Park could now identify every weak point in Corvin anatomy. He knew exactly which nerve clusters would cause instant paralysis, which organs were most vulnerable to specific toxins, and how their thick hides could be penetrated by properly designed weapons. His medical research had given him detailed knowledge of Corvin genetics, metabolism, and psychology. This knowledge wasn't gathered for malicious purposes. Humanity genuinely preferred peace and cooperation, but they had learned from their own violent history that peace was only possible when you were prepared for war, so they smiled and mediated disputes and shared medical technology, all while quietly building the most complete intelligence picture of galactic civilization that had ever existed. Captain Lisa Rodriguez commanded a human merchant vessel that traveled regularly between the core worlds and the outer rim. Her ship, the Peaceful Wanderer, was known throughout the galaxy for its friendly crew and fair trading practices. Other species often invited her to their worlds because humans were so trustworthy and pleasant to deal with. What they didn't notice was that the Peaceful Wanderer's sensors were far more advanced than they appeared. During every trade stop, Lisa's ship was scanning local defenses, mapping communication networks, and analyzing the composition of military vessels. The cargo holds that appeared to carry simple trade goods actually contained some of the most sophisticated surveillance equipment ever built. Back in the council chamber, the debate was winding down. Sarah's suggestion for collaborative research had taken hold, and the Andromedans and Rigel Consortium were already discussing preliminary agreements. The session would end with another successful mediation, another small step toward galactic peace. As the delegates began to file out, chatting in their various languages about dinner plans and evening entertainment, Sarah remained seated. She appeared to be reviewing her notes, but she was actually thinking about the intelligence reports she had received that morning. The Kethmori Dominion was expanding again. Their bioships had been spotted near 3 more systems in the past month. The warrior species that had already conquered dozens of worlds was growing bolder, and their latest territorial acquisitions suggested they were preparing for something much larger than their usual raids. Sarah had been briefed on the Kethmori capabilities. Their living ships could adapt to most weapons. Their soldier organisms could survive in almost any environment. Their hive-mind coordination made them incredibly effective in battle. Most concerning of all, they showed no interest in negotiation or diplomacy. They simply conquered and absorbed. If the Kethmori decided to move against the core worlds, the current galactic civilization would probably collapse within months. The various species were too divided, too focused on their own interests, and too unprepared for coordinated military action. But humanity would be ready. They had been preparing for this possibility for 3 centuries, even while smiling and mediating and appearing completely harmless. Sarah Chen closed her datapad and stood up slowly, the same graceful movement that had become her trademark. Tomorrow she would return to the council chamber, ready to smile and negotiate and maintain the peace that everyone depended on. What no one suspected was that she could also coordinate a military response that would reshape the galaxy. The emergency alarm echoed through the Galactic Council chamber, with a deep, resonating tone that made everyone's blood run cold. Representatives who had been enjoying their morning refreshments suddenly dropped their drinks and rushed to their seats. The great crystal dome above them darkened automatically as the chamber's defense systems activated. Sarah Chen was already in her seat, but something was different about her today. The usual calm smile was gone, replaced by an expression of focused attention. Her datapad showed incoming reports that made her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. The chamber's main display screen flickered to life, showing the desperate face of Admiral Vextai, the Altarian military commander whose forces had been fighting the Kethmori advance for the past 6 months. His blue-scaled face was scarred from recent battles, and his usually proud military bearing had collapsed into exhaustion. Honored Council, Admiral Vextai's voice cracked slightly. The Altarian defense fleet has fallen. Our last stronghold, at Kepler 442, was overrun 3 hours ago. The Kethmori bioships, they adapted to everything we threw at them. Plasma cannons, particle beams, quantum torpedoes. Nothing worked for more than a few minutes before their vessels evolved countermeasures. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. The Altarian Navy had been one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Their defeat meant that the Kethmori were no longer just a problem for the Outer Rim worlds. They were a threat to galactic civilization itself. How many ships? Asked the Zephyrian representative, His feathered crest flattened against his skull in distress. "We started with 800 vessels," Admiral Vexthai replied. 43 escaped. The number hit the chamber like a physical blow, an entire fleet destroyed in a matter of months. The Corvan delegate was making deep rumbling noises that their translator rendered as expressions of dismay. The Mantari were clicking their mandibles in agitation, hanging restlessly from their ceiling fixtures. "The bioships are unlike anything we've encountered," the Admiral continued. "They seem to learn from each engagement. What kills them once won't work again. And their coordination? It's perfect. They move as one mind, controlling thousands of vessels." Sarah Chen raised her hand slightly, the subtle gesture immediately drawing attention despite the chaos. "Admiral, what are their current capabilities? How large is their fleet?" "Intelligence estimates put their numbers at over 10,000 bioships, Ambassador Chen. They've absorbed the technology and resources of every world they've conquered. Each victory makes them stronger." Admiral Vexthai paused, his expression growing even grimmer. "But that's not the worst part. We intercepted one of their communications before our last base fell. They're not just expanding randomly anymore. They have a plan." The main screen shifted to show a galactic map marked with red zones indicating Kethamori territory. The pattern was clear now. They weren't just conquering individual systems. They were positioning themselves to strike at the core worlds from multiple directions simultaneously. "They're going to move against the Council systems," Admiral Vexthai said. "All of them at once. Our analysts believe they'll have the capacity to launch coordinated attacks within 30 standard rotations." The chamber fell silent. 30 rotations was barely a month. Even if every remaining military force in the galaxy united immediately, there wasn't enough time to mount an effective defense against an enemy that had just destroyed the Altarian fleet with such ease. Then the main screen changed again. This time it showed a sight that made several delegates cry out in alarm. A massive Kethamori bioship had arrived at the Council station itself, emerging from hyperspace with the fluid grace of a living creature. The vessel was enormous, easily 5 kilometers long, its organic hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. "They're here," someone whispered. More bioships began appearing around the station. Within minutes, the Council's home system was surrounded by a fleet of living vessels that dwarfed anything the assembled civilizations could deploy. The ships moved in perfect formation, their organic hulls shifting and adapting in response to the station's defensive systems. The chamber's communication system activated, and a voice unlike anything they had heard before filled the air. It wasn't quite mechanical, but it wasn't entirely organic either. It was the sound of thousands of minds speaking with perfect unity. "Galactic Council," the voice said. "We are the Kethamori consciousness. We have observed your species for sufficient time to understand your capabilities and limitations. You are inefficient. You waste resources on conflict among yourselves. You fragment your potential through individual desires and fears." The Corvan delegate tried to interrupt, but the voice continued without pause. "We offer you efficiency. Submit to integration with the consciousness, and your unique qualities will be preserved within our collective. Your species will continue, but as part of something greater." "And if we refuse?" The question came from the Zephyrian representative, his voice barely steady. "Refusal is inefficient," the consciousness replied. "Species that cannot be integrated must be recycled. Their resources will serve the greater purpose." A new image appeared on the main screen. The ruined surface of an Altarian colony world. What had once been cities were now sprawling organic complexes, pulsing with the same bioluminescent patterns as the ships. It was clear that the Kethamori didn't just conquer worlds. They transformed them completely. "You have 30 rotations to decide," the consciousness announced. "Submit willingly and your transition will be gentle. Resist and you will be processed as efficiently as possible. The outcome is the same either way." The bioships began to withdraw, but their message was clear. This wasn't a negotiation, it was an ultimatum. The galaxy would either join the Kethamori consciousness or be destroyed by it. As the alien vessels disappeared back into hyperspace, the chamber erupted in panicked discussions. Representatives were shouting over each other in dozens of languages, some demanding immediate military action, others arguing for surrender. The Centauran moderator had given up trying to maintain order. Through it all, Sarah Chen sat quietly in her seat. But if anyone had been watching her closely, they would have noticed that she was no longer taking notes on her usual datapad. Instead, she was using a different device entirely, one that was transmitting encrypted messages across subspace channels that didn't appear on any galactic communication network. The messages were short and coded, but their meaning was clear to those who knew how to read them. Priority Alpha. Revelation protocol is authorized. All assets prepare for immediate activation. Finally, the chaos in the chamber began to die down as other delegates realized that the human ambassador was waiting to speak. It had become a tradition over the centuries. When things got truly difficult, everyone looked to the humans for wisdom and mediation. Sarah Chen stood up slowly, with the same graceful movement that had become familiar to every species in the galaxy. But something was different about her posture now. The gentle diplomat was still there, but underneath was something else. Something that made the chamber unconsciously quiet as she walked to the center of the floor. The Kethmori consciousness has made their position very clear, she said, her voice carrying the same calm tone it always had. They believe that individual thought and freedom are inefficient. They think that diversity and choice are weaknesses to be corrected. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with representatives from every major species. They are wrong. But they are also powerful enough to enforce their wrongness unless we act decisively. The Corvin delegate leaned forward. What do you propose, Ambassador Chen? Even united, our fleets cannot match what destroyed the Altarians. Sarah's expression remained calm, but something flickered in her eyes that none of them had ever seen before. Perhaps, she said quietly, it's time for Earth to be completely honest about our capabilities. The chamber fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the silence of despair. It was the silence of sudden, sharp attention. Because in 300 years of human diplomacy, no one had ever heard a human ambassador speak in quite that tone. For the first time since first contact, the galaxy was about to learn what humanity was truly capable of when they stopped pretending to be harmless. 3 kilometers beneath Earth's Pacific Ocean, Admiral Marcus Kane stood in a control center that officially didn't exist. The walls were covered with displays showing real-time positions of every major fleet in the galaxy. Red dots marked Kethmori, bioships, blue showed friendly forces, and green indicated human assets that the rest of the galaxy had never suspected existed. The command center was massive, carved from solid rock and shielded with technology that kept it invisible to any scanning method known to galactic science. Hundreds of officers worked at stations that monitored everything from alien communication networks to the defensive capabilities of distant worlds. This was Strategic Command Deep, and it had been operational for over 2 centuries. Sir, called out Lieutenant Commander Torres from her station. We're receiving the revelation protocol from Ambassador Chen. All deep cover operatives are requesting authentication to break cover. Admiral Kane was a man who had spent 40 years pretending to be a harmless cultural researcher, while actually serving as one of Earth's most senior military commanders. His public work studying primitive trade routes had taken him to every major system in the galaxy, where he had quietly mapped defensive installations and identified strategic weaknesses. Authentication confirmed, Kane said, his voice carrying an authority that would have surprised the aliens who knew him as a mild-mannered academic. Signal all assets. The masquerade is over. Across the galaxy, humans began dropping their carefully maintained disguises. Dr. James Park, the respected expert on Corvin biology, suddenly wasn't interested in publishing research papers anymore. Instead, he was coordinating the deployment of bioweapons specifically designed to target Corvin physiology. Weapons that would only be used if the Corvins somehow ended up fighting alongside the Kethmori, but weapons that existed nonetheless. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, whose merchant vessel had been welcomed at ports throughout the galaxy, received new orders through encrypted channels. The peaceful Wanderer's cargo holds opened to reveal military equipment that shouldn't have existed. The ship's friendly exterior panels slid aside to expose weapon systems that were decades ahead of anything the galaxy's military forces used. Similar transformations were happening throughout human space. Research stations revealed massive gun batteries. Mining operations deployed swarms of autonomous combat drones. The peaceful trading posts that connected human territory suddenly bristled with defensive systems that could destroy entire fleets. But the most shocking transformation was happening to the humans themselves. The gentle diplomats, curious scientists, and friendly merchants were moving with military precision. They spoke in tactical terminology, and their eyes held the cold focus of professional warriors. The change was so complete that it seemed like they had been replaced by entirely different people. In reality, they were the same people, but now they were showing their true training. Every human in space had been educated in warfare from childhood. Every cultural exchange student was also a combat specialist. Every merchant captain was also a tactical expert. For 3 centuries, humanity had been building a civilization that looked peaceful while actually being the most militarily prepared species in galactic history. Admiral Kane watched as his displays updated with incoming data from human assets throughout the galaxy. The intelligence network that had been gathering information for centuries was now switching to active combat preparation. Tactical assessment, he ordered. Major Williams, Kane's chief of staff, stepped forward with a data pad that contained the most detailed analysis of Kethmori capabilities ever assembled. Sir, based on 300 years of observation and analysis, we've identified 17 critical weaknesses in their bioship design. Their hive-mind coordination can be disrupted with specific quantum frequencies. Their adaptive biology has predictable patterns that can be exploited. Kane nodded. The Kethmori had made one crucial mistake. They had revealed their true capabilities too early. If they had simply continued their gradual expansion, they might have eventually grown, too powerful to stop. But by issuing an ultimatum that threatened Earth directly, they had forced humanity to reveal defenses that had been centuries in the making. What about their biointegration process? Kane asked. Completely vulnerable to neurological warfare, Williams replied. Their collective consciousness requires specific brainwave patterns to function. We can generate disruptive fields that will cause permanent psychological damage to any integrated organisms. The truth was that humanity had been studying the Kethmori longer than anyone suspected. When the bioships had first appeared in distant systems decades ago, human xenobiologists had immediately begun analyzing samples of their organic technology. Every battle the Kethmori fought had been observed by human surveillance networks. Every adaptation their ships made had been recorded and analyzed. Now that analysis was paying off, humanity knew exactly how the Kethmori ships functioned, precisely what chemicals controlled their biological processes, and specifically, which wavelengths of energy would cause their organic hulls to dissolve. Signal the fleet, Admiral Kane ordered. Begin Phase 1 deployment. Across human space, vessels that had been hidden for decades began emerging from concealment. They rose from the ocean depths of water worlds, detached from asteroid mining operations, and dropped their disguises as civilian transports. Within hours, humanity deployed a military fleet that was larger and more advanced than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The ships themselves were revolutionary. Instead of the bulky metal constructions used by other species, human warships were sleek and efficient. They used gravity manipulation for propulsion, quantum entanglement for communication, and weapons systems that could target enemies across interstellar distances. But the real advantage wasn't in the ships, it was in how they were used. While other species treated space combat as individual ship duels, humanity approached it as a coordinated system. Their vessels worked together with the precision of a single organism, sharing sensor data instantaneously and concentrating firepower with mathematical efficiency. Meanwhile, at the Galactic Council Station, Ambassador Sarah Chen was experiencing her own transformation. The gentle diplomat who had mediated disputes for decades was now coordinating humanity's military response with cold precision. The Zephyrian home fleet is positioned here, she said to the assembled representatives, pointing to a tactical display that showed more detail than any alien intelligence service possessed. Their defensive capabilities include plasma barriers and quantum mines, but their ships are vulnerable to coordinated gravitational attacks. The alien delegate stared at her in shock. How did humans have such detailed information about their military capabilities? More importantly, why were they discussing Zephyrian defenses as if they might need to fight them? Ambassador Chen, the Corvin representative said slowly, are you suggesting that humanity has been preparing for war against us? Sarah's expression remained calm, but her answer sent a chill through the chamber. We prepare for every possibility. We prefer cooperation because it's more efficient than conquest. We choose diplomacy because it produces better long-term results. But we are not weak, and we are not defenseless. She touched a control on her datapad, and the chamber's displays showed real-time images from across the galaxy. Human fleets were emerging from hiding places that no one had suspected existed. Defensive installations were powering up on worlds that other species had thought were uninhabited. The scope of human military preparation was so vast that it redefined everyone's understanding of what their peaceful neighbors had been doing for the past 3 centuries. The Kethmori consciousness believes that individual thought is inefficient, Sarah continued. They think that diversity and freedom are weaknesses. They are wrong about the weakness part, but they are correct about one thing. When necessary, we can achieve perfect coordination. As if to demonstrate her point, the displays showed human ships throughout the galaxy moving in perfect synchronization. Thousands of vessels scattered across hundreds of systems were executing a single coordinated strategy, with timing that was precise to the second. The alien delegates were beginning to understand that they had never really known humanity at all. The gentle species that had mediated their disputes and shared medical technology was also capable of military coordination that exceeded their wildest nightmares. But the most terrifying realization was still coming, because Sarah Chen wasn't finished revealing human capabilities. "The Kethemori have 30 rotations to attack," she said quietly. "They won't need that long. When they arrive, they'll discover that we've been ready for them longer than their species has existed." The first Kethemori probe fleet entered the Sol system expecting to find a peaceful world, populated by gentle philosophers. Instead, they encountered a carefully prepared nightmare that had been waiting for them for over a century. The bioships materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation, their organic hulls pulsing with confident bioluminescence. There were 50 of them, each one capable of adapting to any weapon and coordinating perfectly with the hive mind. They had destroyed the Altarian fleet with ease, and they expected Earth's defenses to crumble just as quickly. The first surprise came when their scouts tried to scan the inner system. Instead of the simple defensive platforms they expected, the Kethemori found a network of installations that defied every assumption they held about human technology. Massive orbital fortresses hung in perfect geometric patterns around Earth's moon. Asteroid mining facilities revealed themselves to be weapons platforms capable of hurling chunks of rock at relativistic speeds. Even more disturbing, there seemed to be invisible barriers throughout the system that their sensors couldn't properly map. Admiral Marcus Kane watched the probe fleet's approach from Strategic Command Deep. His displays showed every bioship, in perfect detail, tracked by sensor systems that the Kethemori couldn't detect or jam. 300 years of intelligence gathering had prepared humanity for exactly this moment. "They're moving in standard probe formation," reported Major Williams. 50 ships arranged in a scanning pattern, with adaptive coordination protocols active. "Psychological warfare package?" Kane asked. "Ready and targeted, sir. The neural disruption fields are calibrated specifically for Kethemori brainwave patterns." Kane nodded. The first phase of humanity's response wouldn't be weapons, it would be terror. The Kethemori had spent so long being the galaxy's most feared species that they had forgotten what it felt like to be afraid. Execute, Phase 1. The attack began in a way that the Kethemori had never experienced before. Instead of energy weapons, or missiles, the human installations began broadcasting precisely calibrated neural frequencies directly into the bioship's organic systems. The signals were designed to disrupt the chemical processes that allowed the hive mind to function. For the first time in their species' history, individual Kethemori soldiers began experiencing confusion and fear without the comfort of the collective consciousness. Some bioships started moving erratically as their crews struggled with unfamiliar emotions. Others began firing randomly at their own allies as disrupted neural pathways caused hallucinations and paranoia. But the psychological warfare was just the beginning. As the probe fleet struggled with internal chaos, human ships began declaking throughout the system. They didn't approach like traditional spacecraft. They moved like hunters appearing from behind asteroids and emerging from sensor shadows with predatory grace. The human vessels were unlike anything the Kethemori had encountered. They were sleek and organic-looking, but not in the same way as bioships. These ships seemed to flow through space, their hulls shifting and adapting as they moved. More disturbing still, they showed no energy signatures that the Kethemori could target effectively. Captain Elena Vasquez commanded the human destroyer, Relentless Tide. She had spent 20 years disguised as a cultural anthropologist, studying Kethemori social structures. Now she was putting that knowledge to deadly use. "Target the lead bioship," she ordered. "Deploy viral warfare package." The Relentless Tide fired what looked like a simple energy beam, but it was actually something far more sophisticated. The beam carried engineered viruses that were designed specifically to attack Kethemori biotechnology. Within seconds of impact, the target ship's organic hull began to dissolve from the inside out. The Kethemori tried to adapt, as they always did. Their bioships began generating antibodies and restructuring their cellular composition to resist the viral attack. But the human viruses were designed to evolve faster than biological adaptation could counter them. Worse still, the viruses were programmed to transmit distress signals that mimicked Kethmori communication patterns. As each infected ship tried to warn others about the attack, it actually spread psychological contamination throughout the fleet. The hive mind began receiving false information that made it impossible to coordinate an effective response. Within an hour, the probe fleet was in complete chaos. Ships were firing on each other, fleeing in random directions, or simply floating dead in space as their biological systems collapsed. Not a single human vessel had been damaged. But Admiral Kane wasn't satisfied with simply defeating the probe fleet. Humanity had spent centuries planning for this moment, and they intended to send a message that would reshape galactic politics forever. Phase 2, he ordered. Throughout the Sol system, installations that had been hidden for generations began revealing their true purpose. What the galaxy had assumed were peaceful research stations were actually the most advanced weapons platforms ever constructed. Massive railguns that could fire projectiles across interstellar distances powered up with energy signatures that made nearby space itself ripple with distortion. The surviving Kethmori ships tried to retreat, but they discovered that escape was impossible. Human gravity manipulators had sealed off every hyperspace exit point in the system. The bioships were trapped in a carefully prepared killing field with enemies that seemed to understand their every capability. Captain Vasquez received new targeting data through quantum-encrypted channels. The human fleet wasn't just fighting the ships in front of them. They were coordinating with installations throughout the galaxy to track and target every Kethmori asset simultaneously. New orders from Strategic Command, her communications officer reported. We're to demonstrate human weapon capabilities for galactic observation. Vasquez smiled grimly. The battle in Sol system was being broadcast throughout the galaxy, though most species didn't realize it yet. Human surveillance networks were ensuring that every major civilization could witness what happened when someone threatened Earth directly. The demonstration began with a single shot from the lunar weapon platforms. A beam of coherent gravitational energy reached across space and touched one of the larger bioships. The vessel didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist, its matter converted directly into energy with mathematical precision. The remaining Kethmori ships tried desperately to adapt to this new weapon, but gravity manipulation wasn't something that biological evolution could counter. Their organic hulls began stretching and distorting as localized gravitational fields tore them apart at the molecular level. But the most terrifying aspect of the human attack wasn't the advanced weapons. It was the cold, systematic efficiency with which they were used. The Kethmori had expected the chaotic battle tactics used by most galactic species. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that treated warfare like a precise mathematical equation. Every human ship knew the exact position of every other human asset. Their targeting systems shared data instantaneously across interstellar distances. When they fired, it was with perfect coordination that concentrated overwhelming firepower on specific targets with no wasted effort. The probe fleet that had destroyed the mighty Altarian Navy was eliminated in less than 2 hours. More importantly, it was eliminated in a way that demonstrated human military capabilities that exceeded anything the galaxy had imagined possible. In the final moments of the battle, Admiral Kane opened a communication channel to the last surviving bioship. The voice of the Kethmori consciousness, no longer unified and confident, crackled with confusion and fear. How? It asked. We are perfect. We adapt to everything. How did you defeat us so easily? Kane's response was broadcast on frequencies that every species in the galaxy could receive. You made the mistake of thinking that peaceful meant defenseless. We prefer cooperation, but we are very, very good at war. We simply choose not to practice it on friends. The last bioship tried to self-destruct rather than face capture, but human containment fields held it intact. The crew would be studied, their technology analyzed, and their intelligence networks mapped. Humanity's victory was complete, but more importantly, it was a demonstration of power that would reshape galactic civilization. As the battle ended and human ships began collecting debris for analysis, the rest of the galaxy was beginning to understand that they had never really known their peaceful neighbors at all. 47 days after the probe fleet entered Sol system, the Kethmori consciousness sent its final message to the human fleet. It wasn't a threat or a demand for negotiation. It was a surrender. Admiral Sarah Chen, no longer pretending to be just a diplomat, stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship as she received the transmission. The voice of the consciousness was different now. Broken, uncertain, filled with something that the hive mind had never experienced before. Despair. We yield, the collective voice stammered. The consciousness acknowledges the superiority of human coordination. We cannot adapt to your methods. We cannot predict your tactics. We cannot survive your focused attention. The war had lasted exactly 47 days, but it hadn't been a war in any traditional sense. It had been a systematic dismantling of the most powerful military force in galactic history, conducted with surgical precision by enemies who understood Kethmori capabilities better than the Kethmori understood themselves. The bioships that had adapted to every weapon ever used against them found themselves helpless against human viral warfare that evolved faster than biological systems could counter it. Their perfect hive-mind coordination crumbled under neural disruption fields that turned their greatest strength into a critical vulnerability. Their ability to absorb and utilize conquered technology became worthless when human weapons operated on principles they had never encountered. But the real horror from the Kethmori perspective was the realization that humanity had been preparing for this conflict for centuries. Every battle the bioships had fought, every adaptation they had made, every technological advancement they had achieved, all of it had been observed, analyzed, and countered by human intelligence networks that the consciousness had never suspected existed. Dr. James Park, whose decades of biological research among various species had actually been preparation for exactly this kind of warfare, reviewed the final analysis reports. The Kethmori weren't just defeated, they were completely understood. Human scientists now knew more about bioship technology than the creatures who had evolved it. Recommendation on disposal of remaining Kethmori assets? Admiral Kane asked. During the final strategy meeting, Sarah Chen looked around the command center that had been hidden beneath Earth's oceans for over 2 centuries. The wall still showed real-time tactical displays of the entire galaxy, but now the red dots representing Kethmori forces were fading one by one as bioships throughout their territory either surrendered or were systematically eliminated. We follow standard human doctrine, she said. We offer them the same thing we've always preferred, a negotiated solution. The other officers in the room nodded. This was how humanity had always operated. They preferred peace, but when forced to fight, they fought with overwhelming efficiency, until their enemies had no choice but to accept reasonable terms. The Kethmori remnants were relocated to specially prepared worlds where their biological needs would be met under human supervision. It wasn't imprisonment, it was rehabilitation. Human xenobiologists worked to help individual Kethmori adapt to life outside the hive mind, while carefully monitoring them for any signs of renewed aggression. But the real transformation was happening throughout the rest of the galaxy. The species that had known humanity as gentle mediators were struggling to process what they had witnessed. The same humans who had spent centuries sharing medical technology and resolving disputes had demonstrated military capabilities that made their combined fleets look like children's toys. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike any meeting in the organization's history. Representatives who had once debated policy with comfortable confidence now spoke in hushed tones, constantly aware that the humans at their familiar table were not what they had seemed. The question before us, said the Zephyrian delegate, his voice carefully controlled, is what this means for galactic civilization going forward. Ambassador Chen, now openly Admiral Chen, sat in the same seat she had occupied for decades, but everything about her presence was different. The gentle diplomat was still there, but everyone could see the military commander underneath. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of demonstrated power that could reshape the galaxy at will. Nothing has to change, she said, her tone, the same calm voice they remembered from countless mediation sessions. Humanity prefers cooperation because it's more efficient than conquest. We choose diplomacy because it produces better long-term results than warfare. Those preferences haven't changed. The Corvin representative, whose people had considered themselves among the galaxy's strongest warriors, leaned forward nervously. But now we know you could, if you wanted to. Sarah's smile was the same patient expression she had worn for 30 years of diplomatic service. We could always have done whatever we chose to do. The only thing that's changed is that now, everyone knows it. The truth was settling over the galactic community like a heavy blanket. For 3 centuries, humanity had possessed the capability to conquer every species they had met. They could have established an empire that spanned the galaxy. Instead, They had chosen to build a civilization based on cooperation and mutual benefit. The realization was transforming interstellar politics in ways that went far beyond military considerations. Species that had spent decades testing the limits of human patience were suddenly remembering every minor diplomatic slight and wondering if they had been living on borrowed time. Others were beginning to understand that human generosity and sharing, medical technology and scientific knowledge hadn't been charity. It had been the behavior of people who were secure enough in their power to be genuinely altruistic. Captain Rodriguez, whose merchant vessel had traveled peacefully throughout the galaxy for decades, found that her trading relationships had changed overnight. The same ports that had welcomed the peaceful wanderer now treated her crew with a mixture of respect and barely concealed fear. Everyone was polite, but everyone was also very, very careful. Dr. Park discovered that his biological research was suddenly in tremendous demand. Species that had been happy to share their physiological data for academic purposes were now realizing that the gentle human scientist had been gathering information that could be used to develop targeted bioweapons. They still worked with him, but now they understood exactly what that cooperation might mean. The changes weren't all negative. Disputes between species that had seemed impossible to resolve were suddenly finding solutions as everyone became more willing to accept human mediation. Pirates and raiders throughout the galaxy discovered that attacking ships carrying human observers was a very bad idea. The general level of violence in galactic civilization dropped dramatically as everyone became aware that humanity was watching and had strong opinions about peaceful behavior. 6 months after the Kethmori surrender, Sarah Chen stood once again in the Galactic Council chamber. The same crystal dome cast rainbow patterns across the floor, and the same representatives sat in their specially designed seats. But the atmosphere was completely different. The human position is simple, she told the assembled delegates. We believe that diversity makes civilization stronger. We think that individual freedom produces better results than collective control. We prefer negotiation to conquest and cooperation to domination. She paused, looking around the chamber, at beings who had learned to see her clearly for the first time. But we also believe that these principles are worth defending with whatever level of force proves necessary. We are as peaceful as the galaxy allows us to be. The new galactic order was one of profound stability, not because anyone had learned to love peace more, but because everyone now understood that the gentle humans who mediated their disputes and shared their medical technology were also the most dangerous species ever to achieve spaceflight. Trade flourished under human protection. Scientific cooperation reached unprecedented levels as species realized that sharing knowledge with humanity brought genuine benefits rather than exploitation. Conflicts that might have escalated into wars were resolved quickly by diplomats whose suggestions carried the implicit weight of demonstrated military supremacy. Earth resumed its role as the galaxy's mediator and peacekeeper. But now everyone understood what that role really meant. Humanity had never been innocent. They had simply been patient. They had spent 3 centuries building relationships and gathering intelligence while preparing for the day when someone would force them to reveal their true nature. The galaxy was safer now, more peaceful and more prosperous than it had ever been. But everyone knew that this golden age of cooperation existed because humanity had chosen to create it. And humanity was fully capable of choosing something else entirely if circumstances required it. In the end, the greatest human victory wasn't military. It was the demonstration that overwhelming power could be used to build rather than destroy, to protect rather than conquer, to create a civilization where strength served peace instead of the other way around. But no one, anywhere, in the galaxy ever again made the mistake of thinking that peaceful meant weak.